Coronavirus. Happy times are here again. New AmeriVersal United States Constitution 21st century. 4 of 5 parts. Before we close with the American and Universal Constitution for the third millennium, AmeriVersal for short, allow me to make a few general statements in preparation for the final outcome. In the case of the United States, the antecedent was the 1789 Constitution, whereas in the case of the United Nations, the previous model was the League of Nations of January 10, 1920. The American Constitution of 1789 predates the French one of 1791, which adopted the Universal Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen of 1789. These two pretty much set the pace for constitutions the world over. Much later came the League of Nations, and of late, the United Nations. The latter one we've covered while having omitted the former for lack of time and space and energy. The question is which document to use as seat of crystallization to build up to a universal constitution for the third millennium. I must confess being partially biased, plus quite ignorant of the parliamentary tradition, and undoubtedly many others also across the board in nation, space, time. In any case, it sounds like a good choice to revamp Old Faithful 1776 to 1789 over starting from scratch, though this is certainly a valid option. In a previous exhibition, we did the new Constitution for the United States. There were various steps in the making. Firstly, came Amendment 28, introducing the concept of the Universal Institute of the Rights and Powers of the People, or People's Universal Institute for short. This initiative was followed by incorporating directly into the Constitution the content of said Amendment 28, keeping the structure of the Constitution as is for the most part, and limiting changes to those parts that required it. But I must bashfully confess having fallen short of being consequent with my own principles of putting up front the people, falling in line instead with tradition of firstly paying lip service to the people and then forgetting it, to be recalled in amendments and proceeding directly in laying out the governmental setup. This invariably took the form of Article 1, legislative power, Article 2, executive power, both as branches of government. Then, secondarily, Article 3, judicial power, in name only, branch like the previous two, but powerless, or at least power dependent on the previous ones. This was followed by a miscellany of Articles 4 to 7, filling in missing details and the like. In this final try of the social contract, I would like to be courageous and boldly take a step with a forward foot and start off by guaranteeing the people's rights and powers, and only then and afterwards laying out the power branches of government in standard format. So in this case, I'll start by guaranteeing the people's rights and powers up front, then covering the legislative and executive powers and branches of government, as well as the federal and state governments respectively. Please indulge with me as I recall some of the considerations that went into the pot of thoughts. Like in math, the total of all possibilities sums 100%. Like in cosmology, the white, dark, and the gray adds up to 100%. Like in physics, the total is made up of kinetic and potential energy adding up to 100%. Like in accounting, everything adds up to 100%. Rights and powers of the people, same as potential to kinetic energy. Thus, likewise regarding the state, human rights and people power should square up 100%. It's like when someone just can't find the time to do some important chore. It's not that they don't have time for it, rather that it's too low on the list of priorities. The thing to do is simply move it up to the top of the to-do list of things. Same here. As things are at present, there's never time for human rights. It's always taken up only once everything else has been attended to, which means shoved till later in the saco of roto of time. We're becoming beings of tomorrow. Of tomorrow will do it. So then, if we the people is the most important, it's a no-brainer. Let's simply start by starting with people's rights and powers, followed by power branches of government. You don't need a PhD to figure this one out, plain common sense. At the end of the day, it's all included. But the advantage of putting people up front is that this way we avoid the reservoir fallacy of rights retained and power reserved to the people in limbo. You don't have to worry about forgetting the government. That's the whole purpose of the social contract to begin with. We need rule of law, not rule of government. The trick is to insert people along with government into the making of the law to thus avoid people falling through the cracks of the hands of governance later on in the game. The legislative and executive branches of government lay the bare bones of the citizen as population, but man as people is a different concept altogether. coming to represent higher values. Otherwise, why use two words, man and citizen, if not to differentiate them as people and population, respectively? The man is still representing its interests, yes, but by way of his children and educators, second story as it were, thus in the process filtering out momentary passions, tribal impulses which need blunting for higher reaches. Resonance is a phenomenon worth looking into given the strong similarity between it and the conjugation of a chronic crisis of civilization and a sudden acute crisis event that triggers the sudden breakdown of things already constitutionally broken. That is, the present as foreground, politics, Dawnism, and physical coronavirus against the background of perennial crisis of civilization since 3,000 years ago, though awareness from slumber only occurred last 300 years since Enlightenment 18th century. Regarding the classical view of human rights, it makes as much sense as burying water resources for posterity and going Thursday instead of using them now, or burying produce to make oil a million years from now instead of eating it right away. My take is that the rationality used by 18th century philosophers was at a loss as to what to do with the middle term. That is, it clearly saw the roles of opposite terms of the legislative and the executive, as the assembly and the king in previous times, but that of justice to people posed a challenge. What cleared my mind in this regard is the mention of justice, just as you shall pursue, of Deuteronomy 16:20. Therein it doesn't say just as you shall pursue, but rather the doubling, as justice, just as you shall pursue. The rationale is simply that the second mention is second story, being the first member ground floor. As cultural, the mental stands as standing on the shoulders of physical nature, all the while grabbing to the soul of the spiritual divine. Now, addressing more so today's situation. Who has failed or what has failed us during the epidemic? Has it been the government, the news media, or the university? That is, political or social society, or both? Piensa mal y atinarás. Play the devil's advocate as the saying goes. Both possibilities are allowed in reality. By way of example, this applies to the present debate regarding the origin of the coronavirus. My guess is animal to human, yes, but manually inserted. The judiciary is guarantor of justice. I've seen that the government respects, quote, we the people, of the preamble to the US Constitution 1776, as well as, quote, rights retained by the people and powers reserved to the people, quote, of Amendments 9 and 10, respectively. So the idea is to lump all these of we the people, of, quote, we the people, the judiciary power, though no longer branch of government, alongside the, quote, retained by the people and powers reserved to the people, altogether as Universal Institute of Rights and Powers of the People. Stated as a formula, it would be the legislative and executive branches power of government plus the Universal People's Institute of Rights and Powers make the state. Let's take a closer look at the social contract of Rousseau and spirit of law of Montesquieu, but now not seen through the lens of dualism, but through the lens of Paradise, Genesis 1:1a Aleph. Within the view of these classical thinkers, the state equals the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government, plus the reservoir of rights and powers of people. That is, the state is the factual government and the people reservoir as fiction. By contrast, a forward-looking one would have the state as equal to the legislative and executive branches of government, plus the judicial power and Universal People's Institute. That is, the state would equal the government and the people. No more packing the judicial branch when executive and legislative coincide one way or another, leaning right or left, as is common spoils in our real-life duocracy. The problem out in the field is that although democracy is the best possible form of government, in theory at least, however in practice, with the United States as its archetype, it is performing poorly, comparatively speaking, to China, its contrary as authoritarian regime. This poses a life and death dilemma, for how can it be if democracy is the best possible form of government after all? The solution out of the dilemma is simply that our present-day Constitution is in dire need of upgrading by updating from its historical premises back in 1776 to improved ones post-2020 in light of recent advances in knowledge as those herein promoted of Paradise. Liberalism started during the Enlightenment period, 18th to 19th centuries in Europe. Industrialization started as protectionist, then as neoliberalism 20th century, it became pro-globalization. The question now moving forward is, what's next? The downside of neoliberal globalization is the three-world globe it created of developed, intermediate, and underdeveloped nations, much like a pyramid with broad base, narrowing body, with tip point. Let's be candid about it. As is, it's just as authoritarian, but differently. If China is socialist, then that would make the United States fascist. Quite an eye-opener. Another of those inherited conventional distinctions that don't make a difference in the real world, just a bag of hot air. Heretical or not, it's worth looking into. This is the end of 4 of 5 parts of the series. Please watch attentively the next and final episode, and most of all, don't miss the happy ending of the AmeriVersal, for short, of the new American and Universal Constitution for the United States, and by extension, for the whole wide world alike. Well, that's all, people. Yours truly, Rick, your Charro Anusim, and GD Bless. Austin, Texas, capital of the world.